Awesome. So, welcome everyone to, I think it's week four, the week four workshop of the Side Hustle Photo Squad. And this is a popular request. A common struggle for everyone is how to find your niche, especially if you've got a lot of interest or you're still trying to figure out if the niche that you kind of selected in the beginning is where you want to go down. You can hear my dog barking in the back. um, but yeah, this is something that I think is really, really important as far as being someone who's doing this as a side hustle. Spoiler alert, your niche is your superpower, especially for our type of situation here. So that's why I want to talk about it. So I'm going to share my slides here. Why does it always does this? It always moves everyone's faces to a different spot. I don't like that. Okay, let me move this here. All right, all right. Okay. Okay. So if you don't know what a niche is, let's just start at the very beginning. This is just from the dictionary. It's a specialized segment of the market for a particular kind of product or service. But in this case, for photography, generally it means some type of specialization or specific type of service that you're going to do at a more narrowed focus instead of just saying, I am a photographer, because that's a very generalized term. So for the Side Hustle Photo Squad, this is something I want to encourage everyone to try to at least pick a niche to explore, as it's going to really enhance your ability to focus, to be able to start doing work without having that overwhelming sense of where do I start? I don't know where I belong. I don't know what to ask questions about. The niche really does help in that regard. So, first off, I'm going to start just with an exercise because I think everyone has already talked about they had some type of interest, right? If you had to pick your niche right now on this call and stick to it for 6 months, like I'm going to make you do it within like the next minute or so, what concerns do you have about making the decision right now? What are like the fears that come to mind? If anyone can type it in the chat or and just share a little bit about what's kind of going on in your head. So limited experience. That's definitely a factor.
For me, it would be maybe not knowing not having the clientele already set up. Maybe
Okay.
just finding my people.
Okay, finding your people. Okay. Anyone else?
What are we talking about? I just came back.
So it's on the slide right there. So if you had to pick a niche right now, like today on this call within this next minute, what are some concerns that you would have about making the decision right now? And what are like kind of the fears that pop up in your head about telling me like this is going to be my niche? What comes up for you? So Kenny mentioned that for him, it's really having limited experience with wedding photography. Tasha said that she doesn't really have an established, I think, client pipeline. Right? That's one thing that you're concerned about is like having already the people that she's going to have that are going to hire her. If you
I agree with her.
So to what regard about not having clients or
Not having paying clientele, trying to market, I guess, so you can actually get people to look at your work and consider booking you for photos and stuff.
Totally having a profile. Gladys, can you clarify a little bit what you mean by profile? So while she types that, some other reasons, the common reasons that I've heard from other people who've pushed back about finding a niche is, they just don't know what they want to do yet. They have so many interests, they're not sure about sticking to one. They also don't want to feel stuck or constrained, right, into one genre. It's gonna be something that may also limit my opportunities. If I say I'm going to be a wedding photographer today and somebody really wants to have me shoot their, their small business, they might not contact me. I'm scared about that. And also just some people who are hyper specialized, they're like, I don't think my niche is going to pay. Nobody's going to pay for this stuff. And then one other thing that I had was what Kenny said is just not having enough experience, right? So let's think a little bit now about consider everyone's situation, right? We're all side hustlers. We have some other type of responsibility. We have other jobs. We have just other things that are taking up our time. That's kind of why I wanted to create this community, because we have a specific situation that we all have in common. So, what do you think full time photographers have as an advantage? What limits do we have as someone who's doing a side hustle?
I would say
They have,
time. Yeah, I would say time as well.
For sure, time.
they have the
Definitely.
equipment,
They have the equipment. Okay.
the networks, and the portfolios.
Portfolio, equipment. And then also for some of us here, like we have families that we're primary caretakers of. We have our jobs that are taking up some of the time, or school, right? There's also a certain amount of energy that we have after we take care of the things that we have to do. You're not going to have as much energy to do the other stuff for photography. Like I think what Kenny has really committed himself is to try to time block a certain amount of time that he dedicates. I don't know if it's each week or each day to photography, but in general, like that's something that we have to push ourselves to. If it's not going to be, it's something that we can easily put at the back corner and not work at it, right? So this is kind of where we're at. Like one, we need to find a niche, but at the same time we have these limitations that we feel like are gonna stop us from doing it. So it's my opinion that, and my belief that the niche is the side hustler's superpower, because it allows you to filter every single thing and decision that you're going to do so that you can just jump right in and slip into the mode that you need to work on your side hustle, because you've picked a focus. So the first advantage is going to be there's less competition. You're trying to find the paid clientele, right? You cannot reach every single person in the world. You don't have the resources or time to market to every single person in the world. So what you're doing by picking a niche is you are competing with less people. And you're also defining the people who are going to hire you. And by defining them, you can find them easier. You know where they're going to go. It takes a little legwork, but you have to understand where they're going to be and go straight to where they are. And once you build a reputation over time, it's going to be easier for them to find you. So that's one key thing. And then when you pick a niche, it's also easier to become a specialist or an expert. And this is an analogy that I've been using quite a bit, is you really like the big fish in a small pond versus the small fish in a big pond. So if you're going to just try to be a journalist wedding photographer in your area, it's going to be tough because you won't be able to say that you have a specific specialty that you do. But you'll also have clarity around if you're starting, right? If you're starting from ground zero, by picking a niche, you'll be able to understand how to build your skill set, to find mentors, which network to tap into, and also when you get opportunities, you'll know which jobs to take on and which jobs to turn down. Because the truth is, all an expert really is somebody who's recognized a certain amount of patterns over time. There's nothing else. So all the stuff that I've been posting on Instagram or whatever, teaching people, and all people started to learn from me, were literally things that I just noticed, and I just put it down on paper and said, these things are what I've experienced. And people are like, wow, this is really great. This is really useful. So and all of a sudden you start building a brand that you're an expert because you've worked with a certain clientele over time. If you work with a different type of clientele every single time over different jobs, you won't be able to say you have a very narrow expertise. This is not to be mistaken, though, with experimenting and learning broadly, because I think that is a necessary skill to have, to be able to try other things. But when it comes to actually building your business, again, being able to market yourself as somebody who is more reputable than the next person, to be better than your competition, or to be the best choice, is really, it's much easier when you have a niche. So and that kind of brings me to my next point, is that you can charge more and get paid more and kind of increase that opportunity and that potential for just getting revenue, because you can charge more, because once you narrow down and have less competition, the likelihood of you being the best option to choose just goes up. And I know it's a scary thing to set down a niche and say like, okay, I'm going to start turning away and limiting all these other options and all that stuff. Remember, we all are doing something else already, and this isn't our main thing, at least yet. So you have the time and the freedom to take your time to build the right clientele from the beginning, instead of having to be desperate to take on every single job that comes your way. You can accept them if you want to, but you're not forced to take them. So I think that's one very big designation for someone who's doing this as a side hustle, is you have to remember, like, you know, if Kenny's out here working and he starts getting these random pet photography inquiries, he doesn't have to take them if he wants to do wedding photography. He needs to learn, or not learn, he needs to understand that he can spend his time very specifically building, if he wants to go down wedding photography, those types of opportunities, or chasing down those opportunities, versus just taking any photography gig just because they're throwing money at you. So that's kind of where a niche again is going to help for someone who is doing this as their side hustle. And then the last thing is really kind of like this overwhelm, right? Like you have so many interests, you don't know which way to go down. Picking a niche almost does the opposite as far as getting stuck like into a box, because you can also keep trying every single thing, and because you're going to be spread out of your energy and your focus and your effort, you might not get that initial traction because you're trying so many different places. So it lets you be able to get traction in a certain area, because you know you'll feel stuck by getting zero traction. At least if you have a niche, you can start pushing 1% every single day down a certain direction, and you'll get traction. I promise you will get traction eventually, especially if you start putting in the different pieces that we're talking about through each workshop. And at the end of the day, it does not have to be permanent. If you spend a lot of time going one direction and all of a sudden you just like, I don't think this is the right way, what you're doing is you're learning about what works and what doesn't work, what you like and what you don't like. That's ultimately the best way to think about it, because as entrepreneurs, basically the most successful ones are the ones who failed the most. And it kind of sucks because we only have a limited amount of time. So you have to have the correct mindset, because there's a potential that we will fail at the market that we choose first. And that's just, it comes to the territory of being a business owner. So that's something that I want to kind of share. Is there any questions or comments now that we kind of shared about this? Like if anyone has still some objections, I'd love to talk about it before we start talking about ways to actually niche down. Anyone? Everyone just agree? Thumbs up? Everyone's like, yes, this sounds like the right way.
I had a question.
Sure. Yep. Go
If
for it. Alex.
you're a portrait photographer, do you need to niche down more, or you know what I'm saying? Or do you just say you're a portrait photographer?
I still think we're gonna actually go into this a little bit more, but I can kind of do a little preview. But if I told you I was a portrait photographer, do you know what I'm gonna shoot? If I didn't show you any
Technically,
photos?
no.
Yeah. So it's one of those things where this is something down the line, is like having an elevator pitch, right? So when you can kind of tell somebody in like one sentence exactly what you do, it really helps to kind of develop like a little bit more specificity on one, like if you solve somebody's problem. So for example, if I'm a portrait photographer, hey, my name is Reggie, I'm a portrait photographer for actors who are looking to build their kind of like actors portfolio, so that they can start getting gigs within the LA whatever TV show industry, right? That's a very specific thing. And when that person hears that, they might not need to hire you, but when they actually hear like, hey, my cousin's gonna start acting, do you know anybody who could do headshots? They just think, oh, Reggie couldn't do that. You know what I mean? So it's really understanding. And when we go down to the last section of this workshop, well, you'll start to see more why it's important, because part of it is not only just like things that you can get hired for, but it's also people that you like to work with. It's also something that you're passionate about doing. Um, so you can feel energized and excited, so that if you narrow down here, you'll always be pumped to get this work, or you'll always be knowing it's going to be a good return on your money, or you know you're going to be working with people you like. It's like you kind of have to build it in a way that it's something that you can always, or not always say yes, but you know, if it's the right opportunity, always say yes to, and be able to say no to other things. Because if you say you're a portrait photographer and someone wants to take portraits just for their LinkedIn, and you're not, you really want to do musicians, why not just say I'm a musician portrait photographer or something like that, if that makes sense.
Okay.
Is there a reason? I want to challenge you. Like, what is your reasoning for wanting to keep it just as portrait photographer versus picking a specific type of people you want to photograph?
I don't know yet. I like doing like working with people, so I
Mhm.
know being a portrait photographer, you get to work with people, so
Yep,
different.
totally. And then we'll actually, I think this is a good segue into the next part of our workshop, is you get to understand what are some ways we can niche, because it doesn't always have to be just what I said. What I said was kind of specifically industry specific, so actors, right? But there are other ways that you can specialize, and let's get into it. So there are 3 different ways that you can niche down. The first way is kind of like your skill or service. So you can go from a photographer down to a wedding photographer, down to an elopement photographer, down to a city hall elopement photographer, to specifically write a San Francisco City Hall elopement photographer. That's very hyper specialized. It doesn't mean that you cannot entertain any type of other wedding, or you can't do any other type of elopement, but at least people know what for sure I can do, right? So this is one way to do it, is just kind of like try to narrow down to some very specific type of situation. And there is going to be some understanding of like, is this going to create revenue? Is there people who are in demand for it? Obviously there's a lot of people who are getting married at City Hall, so this isn't something that's too specific that no one's not looking for, right? Can anyone think of some other types of examples, going from, for example, like a portrait photographer? What is another idea of a kind of more narrowed down portrait photographer?
Fashion.
Yeah, so fashion portrait photographer. If you want to go even deeper than a fashion portrait photographer, what are some ideas that you have?
That's all I got.
So you can think about certain types of fashion. So is it avant-garde? Is it, you know,
I don't know what avant-garde mean.
so just, yeah. So in general, like avant-garde is kind of like the non-traditional, like the very unique and almost like something you can't wear outside fashion. So for those upscale avant-garde fashion designers, do you photograph that? Or is someone going to do e-commerce, right? Like you're going to take photos for an e-commerce brand that does streetwear, or you can also just do fashion on the runway. You know, like these are all different types of things. So if you want to go down fashion, learn a little bit more about what's within the fashion world, and see if there's something that really, you know, interests you more, and go down that way. Or for example, if someone's an automotive photographer, you can pick specifically race cars or European cars, or you can just do regular cars, or you can do cars for commercials. Like there's different directions that you can take, instead of just saying I just photograph cars, because that could be anything, right? So it's really kind of thinking a little bit more and deeper about which area you could focus on. That way, because we're doing this as our side hustle, we can again focus our time specifically on those networks, those markets, those industries that we want to kind of knock on the door of, so to speak, versus just telling everyone and just hoping that people find you. Yeah, high fashion, urban fashion, definitely. And then so another way you can do it is kind of more like of your style, your type of photography style. So sometimes people do black and white documentary wedding photography. That's specifically what they're doing. They're not expected to shoot in color, they're not expected to pose the couple, right? Some people are just like photojournalistic black and white wedding photography. For or if you and it's basically the way you kind of get to this is you think of whatever type of subject matter or genre, and then mix it with a specific type of technique or skill or aesthetic, and you kind of marry that together. So if you want to do pet photography and you really love using off-camera flash, you can make really epically lit pets versus just the very light and airy photos. You can make them look like the pets are superheroes or something, right? So you can kind of, and once people are looking for a photographer for their pet, if they see that and it kind of separates you when they're looking at all the Google images, they're looking at other pet photographers in the area, and it will set your work apart so that if they aren't looking for that stuff, they won't ask you, right? And that's fine because they wouldn't be happy with your work anyways. But the people who kind of it jumps out to, they will hire you. So that's kind of a way to think about that. So Ken, anyone either on the chat or if you want to unmute, think of some ideas about using kind of very specific either photography style or aesthetic to niche down in the area that you're thinking about.
Maybe a wedding photographer who shoots in black and white.
Yep, totally. Is there something else that you think you can twist a little bit more?
We want to be more specific, maybe going back to your example of an elopement photographer or a city hall elopement photographer who shoots in black and white.
Yep, totally. And then, so the next kind of way to think about niching down is really kind of like thinking about your clientele's either industry or market. And you could just be a little bit more general. You can say like, I want to work with tech startups or music artists or restaurants. But if you can get a little bit, if you can dive a little bit deeper, like the cannabis industry is like booming. If you want to do just cannabis startups and the people who do like these automated delivery of that stuff, or if you want to photograph like specifically metal rock bands, or you only want to do kind of like small business owned, family owned burger restaurants, right? These are different things to kind of specialize in, so that you can really, again, focus your energy and be kind of known for doing a specific thing. One kind of aside that I want to make about going down a niche is that there's a lot of fear about like, okay, if I only show one thing, then no one's ever going to hire me for something else. But you have to think about it in this way. If you present a specific type of body of work and it's done phenomenally, right? Then people are just going to assume that you have this type of quality around everything you do. But if you start showing all the other stuff that you're interested but aren't super good at yet, then it kind of waters down the thing that you are good at. That's one thing I want to just kind of challenge, because it's like, I was in a professional group before and they did like, it was specifically for graphic designers. And if you make really, really great logos, but then you show subpar website designs and you show some subpar packaging, it's going to make someone's interest in you not as good, because they're going to be seeing all this other work and like, that kind of doesn't look that great. So I don't, maybe their logo portfolio is kind of skewed a little bit and it's not showing the true story. Whereas the other thing is, if you see Lance Armstrong is like a super, really prolific bike rider. If you thought about like, I wonder if he's like fit enough to like run too. You're like, probably, right? Because he's just doing so well at like something athletic. So you would assume that he's kind of like maybe kind of above average at something else. So if that person really jives with you, if like I have a lot of people say like, hey, I'm curious, do you also do maternity? I don't show any maternity photos on my portfolio really, but they'll still reach out to me because they just assume that I might do it because I do weddings and family portraits already. So don't think that no one's going to reach out to you at all, because they're also hiring the person themselves. But if you show a lot of great work, they're just going to start assuming that since you put your best foot forward with that type of work, that people make the assumption that you're kind of good at something else too, if that makes sense. Because I know a lot of people are like, well, I don't really want to just start honing in on one thing, and that's usually what people's fear are. So now this is where everyone's going to, you can get out of just listening mode, and this is where we start, either get a pen and a paper or jot down in the chat or jot down on like a doc. And we're gonna start thinking about how to find our niches, right? So there are four, these are the 4 P's that I'm calling them, elements of a good niche. So you're gonna think about passion, pay, this is important because we're having a business here, people, and the practice. So the first thing is, are you passionate about the work? Do you find personal fulfillment about this specific type of work? This is the first thing. And then the second thing is, can the client actually pay enough to meet your financial goals for your business? And if this is your side hustle, if there isn't like a huge financial goal, you can start a little bit more moderately. You don't have to go chase and try to compete with the people who are doing it full time if you don't have to. But if you have a specific goal in mind, then be smart with that number. And also remember that you're taking time away from the other things that you have to do. So what is something that's worth enough money to step away from those things? So if you have kids, how much money would you need to spend a full weekend day not around them? That's something that I consider. It's like, okay, I need X amount of money. If you're going to tell me I can't, I might be gone and my kid starts walking that day. You know, like you want to make sure it's kind of worth it, or and that you have a bad client. That's something that you have to consider. And then the next thing is the people. Do you actually understand them? Are you part of this group? Do you identify as these people? Because that really helps you to be able to market and speak their language and all that stuff. As far as your target customer goes, do you like working with them? If you, I wouldn't, like for me, I don't shoot high upscale weddings because the times that I have work with them, it wasn't always a pleasant experience. So I try not to target those types of weddings anymore. So that's just something that I from my experience, I know kind of which way to target. But if you're going down that way, it's really understanding how those people think, where are they gathering, so that you can be kind of like creating, not noise, but you know, they creating like a presence within that type of world that they hang around in. And the last thing is kind of practice. So is there a path that you can find within this niche that you can actually focus on and build your skill set around and develop expertise and kind of climb up? Or is it something that doesn't really, you can't really figure out where that might go? It's also a thing for if you are trying to be an expert, something that you can kind of build expertise in and have a reputation around. So kind of thinking about all those things. So if you have some niches that you're considering, this is where we're going to take some time to think about it and rate each section on this specific niche from 1 to 10 on each of these 4 things. And then what you got to do is add them all up and then compare them to, for example, another niche option that you have. So this is a good time to just be a little bit exploratory, right? So even if it was a niche that you weren't like gung-ho on considering, just write it down and see if it actually might score higher, and if that's something, an option that you weren't considering. And I know, for example, some people say like, oh, street photography, you can't get paying clientele or things like that. You have to think about other types of revenue drivers for that too. For example, I have many friends who are street photographers and their main revenue driver is by creating content, not by having specific client photo shoots. And I also know other street photographers who do lookbooks for urban fashion. So it's like there's things to think about. They're like kind of like horizontals near your niche that you could still get money from, or you know, get revenue from. So just don't write something off specifically on that. And also, again, for that pay thing, really consider what is your actual financial goal behind it, and is that realistic? Because a lot of people's like, yeah, wedding photography because that's the most, makes the most money, or like is easier to get money. But I will, you know, just from experience, that is something that is very energy draining, and if you're not fully in it, it's easy to kind of get burnt out on. So that's one of those things where on the passionate fulfillment side, you have to be honest with that too. So definitely take some time. If anyone has any questions, you can feel free to unmute. But let's say we'll take 5 or 10 minutes. I'll mute myself too, and I will actually try to do this for a certain one. And yeah, we can talk about it. And I will keep this slide up so that you guys have it to see.
Reggie, this is a slightly off-topic question, but just curious, do you prefer small/medium weddings as opposed to large weddings?
For me personally,
Hmm.
and when you say small and medium and large, what are you talking about?
I guess because you mentioned, you had some experience shooting weddings that you weren't a fan of, and so I may have misunderstood before, but just curious, like when you're looking to take on a wedding opportunity, what are
Mhm.
some things that you look for?
Got it. So for me, it's not really about specifically the size, like the number of guests, because the way that I approach my business is actually I treat every wedding the same regardless of the size.
Okay.
Because if it's 100 people to 400 people, I still operate exactly the same because my goal is not to photograph every single person at the wedding. It's not realistic. At least that's what I tell my clients. So that's something I tell them up front. I think what I was thinking more along the lines of was really kind of like budget, because certain when for example, if someone approaches me wanting a wedding in my area for like $1,000, that's a very different type of buyer's mindset than somebody who approaches me with $4,000. Um, because if you ever think about kind of like the Starbucks customer, there's all these customers that will drink half the drink and then they'll go back and say like, you made the drink wrong. Can you exchange this? They're like very that they want everything perfected even though they're not trying to invest a lot. And then there's other people who will pay $15 for a coffee at some bougie coffee place, right? And they'll think it's the best thing in the world because they're kind of convinced that this is like the best coffee in the world because of marketing or branding or whatever. Um,
Hmm.
for weddings, I like to go kind of like in that middle zone where people who definitely are trying to jump through a hoop to kind of invest a little bit, um, but they're not in this sense of where they're using their wedding to show off the glitz and the glam and all that stuff. So I think that's where I've really found mine, and it's basically by setting a certain price. So for my area, it's on my website, so it's not really giving away too much, but like I've set my price range between at 5,000 now, just so that I can start turning people away. So like those people who reached out to me originally from that thing that I posted on Slack, they're asking me for $2,500, and that somebody who's that misaligned on me putting my price on my website and coming to me like that, I already know that's a red flag because they're asking me to go down from the very beginning. If somebody approaches me asking me to move their price, even though I don't even know who they are, it it shows where the power not the client business dynamic is as far as the power goes. And
Hmm.
they're you could see the guy was really trying to flex on me, right? He's like, I've
Right.
got 5 people. I was just like, dude, like, fine, go let them hire you. Like, it's cool because he thought that I was desperate, right?
Right.
Um, and the main reason for this is because they were a client referral. So one thing is some client referrals are like you have to actually give them a little bit more, show them more data and stuff up front, because usually they'll just trust their friend and just try to book as fast as possible. And I've
Hmm.
heard nightmare stories by a client referral like that. So that's the one thing, is because I've had another friend who had just a client referral and that person had way more money than what his budget or his price was. So they just hired him outright and he had to re-edit the wedding 3 times.
Oh, so
And
when you, oh, sorry, go ahead.
well,
I was gonna say, when you say have more data up front, you're talking about your style and
Yeah.
what you offer. and all
almost
this.
over communicate, because if they're already trying to book you without having to do your normal process, that's almost a red flag, because you don't know if they looked at your portfolio or whatever. Like this guy came in really just trying to get me to bring it down without having to go through the entire process. And something for me personally, I don't take any calls until they tell me they align within the budget, because in order to schedule a call, I have to have my wife watch my kids. She might have to move a meeting. I might have to have my in-laws watch my kids. That's a lot of effort for me. So in my current like season of life, I'm not going to take a call for 30 minutes just because you're free. Like that's just how I operate. So it's because I start valuing my time, and it's something that I'm not going to say I'm like rolling in money, because I'm not. But it's one of those things where I just sent a mental barrier to do that, because this is, at the end of the day, my main commitment to my wife and to my family is that I have to be able to watch my kids, and that's my priority. So this other stuff is really the side hustle, what I do on the off hours. So I don't know. That was a really roundabout question. I think one thing I suggest to you is to try to experience other types of weddings, and you'll see different types of personalities and cultures within them. So if you can second shoot or assist for other people and get those opportunities, once you start building your portfolio, you'll be able to get those second and assisting gigs more, just to try it out. Because the first person that I assisted for, he did a lot of high tier weddings, and some of his clients were like pains. So I could just I saw like what it was like, and it was very bougie. It was very like you just buttered up to the planner. That's all your real goal was to it was
Mhm.
like high school. So that's why I knew that like I don't want to go down high tier weddings, because all that is kind of like getting coffee with planners and going to shows and like rubbing elbows with all these other businesses so that you can get the same clients that they have. That's why I haven't gone down that route.
Got it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I think, oh, sorry, Kenny. Go ahead.
No. Go ahead, Todd.
Oh, I was just gonna kind of chime in that, I mean, that's the only thing that appeals to me about high cost weddings is the fact that you can charge a shed load of money to
Yeah.
do them. And you sort of, you have like a weekend and you just go, okay, I'm gonna deal with this and make a decent amount and then just try and forget about it and move on. But yeah, I don't even enjoy going to big weddings. I didn't have a big wedding. They're just not my thing. So, I mean, that's easy to sort of go, no, that's just a hard no. Unless I become completely broke and get desperate. But
Yeah.
how do you even find, like get started on being a second shooter for big like, weddings and things?
So for those, it's really about being in the places where other photographers are looking for second shooters. So there's Facebook groups, there are forums. That's how I started in the beginning. There was forums before, but I think now it's moved on to Facebook groups. And
I tried to get into the second shooter, and
Mhm.
no, everybody was like, they just ignored me. And I'm saying here, like, damn. I even had one guy look at my portfolio. He's like, your portfolio is really nice.
Yeah.
But
I will say there's also a difference between an assistant and a third and a second shooter. So if I were to hire a second shooter, if none of you have shot a wedding on your own before, I wouldn't even hire you. That's just my standard. My standard for a second shooter is this person has to be able to shoot the whole wedding if I just broke my leg. That's what my and then there's other people who just need a body with a camera, holding a camera. They might not even use their photos, but they need a person there, because part of their value proposition to the client is like, there are two shooters at your wedding. So that's another way to do it. So it's really and then there's also an assistant, which is somebody that shows up, that helps, that may know how to shoot. Sometimes they allow you to shoot or not. That was actually how I started learning the industry, was because I literally just carried a camera bag for somebody. He had like 5 lenses in it, and I would just have to stand around smiling, and just, he's like, oh, I need this lens. I'm like, okay, like take off the cap, put it on. Like that's literally what I did for 8 hours. Like it's a humbling experience. And then eventually he's like, you can bring a camera with 1 lens. That's it. So I started building my portfolio saying like, which is the lens that I'm going to shoot with today. And then all of a sudden he got to a point where he actually let me shoot. He gave me assignments. Okay, you're gonna stand on this side here and you shoot whatever is there. And it was like some random ass spot within the wedding that like no one actually would really have a vantage point, but there's maybe one shot that he could use. And if I got my photo in his blog, I was really excited. You know, it's just kind of like working. And I shot with him for I think 12 or 14 weddings. A lot of what I learned was just watching what he was doing, seeing how he talked to the clients, taking notes of like, I don't like how that client talked to him, or I don't like how he said that to that client. I don't like what he did. You don't have to tell them that you don't like it, but it's just you're observing, you're really soaking it in. And then when you start working with your own clients, you're actually you're at least acclimated to the pressure of what it feels like, of what a realistic wedding feels like. Because a lot of people say like, you know, they have me or like another person like John Branch or Taylor Jackson who have YouTube videos that behind the scenes. That's like one way to familiarize yourself with a wedding, but it doesn't replace being at there as a vendor and a photographer and someone who's pressured to take the photos. It's a different feel, for sure, because you get to see what it actually feels like at the wedding. So I think getting your first one is always hard. My first one was Craigslist. So my very, very first wedding gig, I responded to a Craigslist ad with just photos of random stuff from my Flickr. Like it was like photos of my dog, my wife, and stuff like that. And then the person hired me saying that they were coming from New York, blah blah blah. So then I shot that wedding. He wasn't actually a real wedding photographer, but I was able to scrounge enough, like 8 to 12 photos, that I put together, and I started posting it on this other group. And then somebody gave me a chance there, and it turned out that that person was really good friends with the actual high volume wedding photographer, and I started carrying that guy's bag. That was what happened. So that's kind of how it happened. It's a little bit harder now because of the internet's there's a low barrier to entry to get on to put yourself out on the internet now, because before there's like you had to make a forum and then you had to kind of build some street cred on the forum and people would hire you through there. At this point, like if I were to post on a Facebook group for a second shooter and say, hey, I have a second shooter gig, 40 people will respond. Maybe one person is qualified, and I actually still just only hire the person that I got from my friend, because it's within certain type of tiers of wedding photography. It's really kind of like who you know. Kind of sucks, because there's not a huge amount of opportunity sometimes, but it's like it's because from the perspective of a wedding photographer, if I, you know, I don't Kenny, how many weddings have you shot?
No.
So if Kenny shows up saying like he shot 0 and I told him he's going to be my second shooter, and I say, hey, Kenny, can you do the groom coverage? I don't know what it's going to look like because he's never shot it before. He doesn't even have a preview of what he could give me, right? So it's a risk as a business owner to trust an assignment to somebody who hasn't have an experience. So I think that's where it's kind of like that Velociraptor meme where it's like, how do you get 2 to 3 years experience if you don't have 2 to 3 years? Like every job hires for 2 to 3 years experience, but you don't have it. It's really kind of like I don't even know, like a networking game, or like, I think my biggest suggestion is to create a body of work that would be useful to a primary photographer. I think I had, is that your post, Kenny, that I shared it with? It's about like having photos of people getting ready. Specifically the groom getting ready is something that a lot of people don't share when they're showing their portfolio as a second shooter. So showing like the assignments that you might get as a second shooter, which is groom getting ready, crowd reactions, detail shots, cocktail hour candidates. Showing that you can do those things is more useful than you showing me post couples of the bride and groom. Because when I go to a wedding, I'm the one doing that, not you. So it's like, you know what I mean? So that's something that I want to see. And then one thing that really got me hired a lot as a second shooter when I was wanting to do them still was I had a fully uncalled, unedited set of photos. And I would send it to them because that is going to be the body of work that they have to work with when you give them your cards at the end of the day, or you give the photos. Because if you show them 12 of your best photos, that doesn't tell anything about what you can actually give them. Because most of the time, I know some other areas ask the second shooter to edit them, but in California, generally you give them cards to shoot on, you ask for it back, and then you look and edit it and do all the other stuff. So the primary photographer is the one who has to do all the work.
So they won't let you use any of the photos if you're just starting.
That's something that you ask for upfront. So, if you shoot on their cards, it's very helpful if you have like a way to either get it from them or to shoot two cards. So for example, when I second shoot for another photographer, I put his card in the main slot and I put my card in the other slot. And then you ask up front. You have to agree up front, like, can I use these? And then sometimes they have restrictions. It just depends on the photographers. One photographer didn't let me use any of the photos at all, and she didn't tell me that up front, and that's how I learned the hard way. Some photographers, like for me, I prefer if someone shoots with me that you do not share anything or tag my clients in it until I've already delivered my files, because it makes me look bad if you're sharing teasers before I've even communicated anything about the wedding. Because that's kind of a, if you're a very eager photographer and want to edit them, try to make sure that you understand what the social media policy is around it. Because for example, if Kenny comes with me to shoot a wedding, I've got a client backlog of 5 weddings to edit through, and then he posts the photo that he really liked. He edits it in his style, not mine. He tags my client, and it is an awkward situation, and it's something that happens quite a bit. If you don't know kind of like what whatchamacallit, the kind of etiquette around it is, but some photographers don't care at all. So it's like my biggest thing is to have these conversations up front and let them know, like, can I post this on my portfolio? Can I show it to people on a non-listed portfolio? Like, what can I do so that you can go down that route? Hopefully that's curious if people went down how people are doing about the niche exercise though. Is anybody able to compare, contrast like 2 niche options and maybe share what you rated them at?
I got 3. I got fashion, small business, and wedding.
Okay.
Fashion's number 1, small business is 2, and wedding is 3.
As far as and when you say 1, 2, and 3, that means like you're ranked as far as what's the best fit for you?
Yeah, I put 3 as the least
Mhm.
because I haven't actually shot a wedding.
Got it.
I've been trying to get into experience that as like either just being there to watch the process.
Yep.
And in fashion, I've already shot a couple models and they was wearing pretty fashionable items, not high-end fashion stuff, but
Mhm.
and then small business, I did like little what you would consider stock type photos with the white background,
Yeah,
fresh, clean type of shoot.
totally. And when you did the exercise, how did they rank? Like for fashion, what number did you get when you added up all your different elements of your passion, pay, people, the
Oh, passion. Oh, hold on. Let me add that real quick.
yeah.
Because I
So
just
they-
put numbers.
Oh, okay, yeah. So you definitely can rank them, but I think one thing that sometimes is eye-opening is if you actually write all the numbers down, right? Like sometimes one thing that you'll realize that the revenue is maybe comparable between 2 different genres, but one you're really, really passionate about, and just having these kind of added up in a more like sterile, kind of like systematic way versus like, oh, of course I'm gonna love wedding photography, but when you actually put it down on paper, what does that actually look like? I think that's something that's pretty eye-opening.
I could go next, maybe.
Yeah, for
I
sure.
did, I came up with lots of different things. Well, I guess that's not surprising.
Mhm.
Street wasn't on there, so I just didn't even go there. I actually ended up with, I was thinking elopements, but it has to be pretty niche, pretty small, and outdoor. Like I was getting niche, right? Like that actually came up because I figured actually the pay would be pretty good compared to say moms and babies or maternity portraits or that kind of thing. So yeah, it was a good exercise to clarify the various factors when you think about each one and putting a number to them.
Did you have one that came out on top?
Yeah, it was the elopements, which sort of surprised me because I
Mm.
didn't think I liked weddings. So maybe that's
Yeah.
maybe that's right.
Maybe you can re-rank your passion of it if it's not.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah.
I mean, there's a little bit of I do need to, I mean, at the point where I kind of do need to, it needs to pay. Like I kind of have to factor that as quite high these days. So
Yeah.
that's kind of what was pushing that up, I think.
Yeah.
Not that it's going to be like a big wedding pay, but it's
Yeah.
just I think it's going to be more. But yeah.
Definitely. I think one thing to clarify is when you're thinking about can they pay is about you have to understand there's also like the scale, right? You can always do more of a certain thing. There's also the after shoot sales. So for example, if you do a family portrait, there's a lot of family portrait photographers that make a lot of money on the back end. So their sitting fee is like a certain amount, but they sell a lot of stuff after. Or you can just be super high end. Like I've shot elopement weddings for $4,000 and there's only 3 people there versus another wedding that was, back when I started, that was like 2,500 for 300 people there. Like there's different tiers of that you can reach. Obviously that's something that you kind of have a trajectory to, but I think the pay one is probably the most flexible part of doing this as your side hustle is you can set a realistic thing. If your thing is like, can I make $5,000 with it? If you can say yes, then you can rank that as a 10. And then stock photos, can I make $5,000 with it? That's probably lower because you have to sell so many stock images to get that. So I think that's where, again, it's lean into the fact that you can take your time to get to a certain number. So what is the number you need right now to start exploring it? That's where you have to rank that. So I think Mina was able to rank everything up and fashion came up on top for sure. That's what it looks like. So, and wedding is last. So I think seeing all those numbers, and it's like if you're trying to start building your portfolio, do you feel like you have a little bit more understanding of where you can focus on as far as opportunities? Like if someone came to your door saying that we have a wedding for you, a small business shoot, and a fashion one, and you can only pick one, that's what I'm hoping this exercise of will help you figure out. Does that give you any more clarity? Yeah, she said it would be fashion. Curious how Alex and Gladys and Kenny, how this is working for you.
Yeah, this was an interesting exercise. I'm glad we did it. So obviously, I had wedding photography, and then the second niche that I had was fashion photography, specifically streetwear for like smaller known brands. That's currently like what my current portfolio is mostly of, just because I have a friend who he has his own, fashion line, and he just needed someone to take pictures, and so that's predominantly what I'm most comfortable with. So I have fashion photography at 34 and weddings at 33.
Interesting. What is the thing? Would you mind being able to share how it all scored down?
Yes. Let's see here. So for wedding, I think the biggest opportunity is the pay. It's the most lucrative.
Yeah.
But for passion, I gave a little bit of an edge to fashion photography.
Got it.
Yeah.
I would also say when it comes to wedding photography, that the most under kind of the passion is the one that people ignored the most, because it's like as soon as I had kids, as soon as I already started getting more busy, that thing really dropped down. Like I like shooting weddings for specific people that I like, but everyone else is like, I'll be honest, I'm not as in it as I see other people talking about it. I'm in other professional wedding groups just to kind of observe and see what people are doing, and people are like really into it, like storytelling, this and that. You're doing this for that and that. I'm just like, dude, I'm just I know I can do the work. I'm like a
Right.
craftsman. I know I can build a chair. And I
Mhm.
know I know that it's a comfortable chair. I know that it looks good. I know that it's worth the money, but there are some photos that I enjoy taking, but it's just like if you're telling me I gotta shoot a whole wedding for 8 hours away from my family and the clients are a pain, it's starting to pull at me a little bit. Whereas if you told me I had to spend 8 hours with you all on a workshop in a place that I rented out, I feel okay about that. So that's why like for me right now, passion is really like the education aspect. The second passion of mine would be more content creation. So like the non-live
Mhm.
stuff. Weddings is gonna be lower. The only like my wife asked me yesterday, if you had to stop weddings today, like turn off your inquiry form, would you do it? I was like, I don't know. She's like, why? What's scaring you? It's like because I need it to create content. And she's like, you can't just start doing giveaways for weddings to create content or like anything else or hiring models or reaching out to specific people. I was like, yeah, I guess I could do that. So it's like, she's like, fine, then stop doing it. I was like, she said she'll give me to the end of, she said she'll give me to the end of March to decide to keep my actual business open. But she's very she pushes me. So
Yeah, that's good. That's
yeah,
good.
yeah. But
Is
it's
she feeling better?
yeah, she is. She was able to last Friday she tested negative, and now she's easing back into it. But I don't know how many y'all have had it or other family members that had it. It's definitely she likes to work out and all that stuff. She still isn't 100% yet, so it is kind of lingers a little bit, even if you're not infectious anymore. So we're still working through that. But yeah, cool. Alex and Gladys, I'm curious if you Gladys, you posted here. So you had your suite 15, 16, 38, 35 for weddings. Seniors and product photography is 25 and 30. I'm curious for those ones though, which one was your passion ranked the most out of all those? Because I can see why weddings and suite 15, 16 parties would probably be the most revenue driving, so they could be ranked like high as 10 for the money. I'm curious. That's something that I always want as everyone who's doing this as their side hustle to really think about the passion part, because that's where you can get drained out really fast if this is not your full-time gig. And then Alex, if you feel like sharing, or you don't have to share, but I'm just curious, just wanted to check in to see how you were doing.
Is this thing on?
Yep, we can hear
Okay,
you.
perfect. All right. So with like passion, like I love doing like I guess younger folks. So actually with passion, I got a 8 for like senior photography and like sweet 15s because I can actually like relate and I have siblings. So I just like the vibes with people.
Nice.
Um
Okay.
with weddings, that goes down to like a 6, a 5, just because it is high pressure.
Yep.
You have maybe bridal parties, grooms, people like following you to like do the bride and groom portraits, and it's a little bit like anxiety, anxious,
Yeah.
just so
Yeah.
that's where. And then like product photography, haven't done it, but it's probably not going to be fun because there's no interactions, but then it's a plus too. So
Yeah.
right now it's at 5.
Got it. And as far as I'm curious, so when you do the Sweet 15, 16 events, how is that different for you as far as it seems like am I hearing that like kind of like the social aspect you can get burnt out on sometimes at events?
I guess with sweet 15s and 16s, most of the time the parents are just like, hey, you guys are like clicking together. I'll be over here
Mm,
and you can like do whatever. And I'll be like, okay, so I'll like have my time with the quinceañera. And it's like I don't feel that pressure because I don't have so many eyes looking at me, I guess.
makes sense. Okay.
Versus with the weddings, it's like there's groups of people like waiting to take their pictures and
Totally. That makes a lot of sense. And I think from what you shared too, it does seem like, would you say that senior photography and doing the the sweet 15, 16 parties is an easy. I think those are two things that could be kind of paired together under one kind of like brand or studio. Because like for
Mhm.
example, I tend to do families and weddings together because when they get married, they tend to hire me for their family stuff too. So that's why I share it kind of as one thing. Um, but definitely, I push the weddings first. I think
Mhm.
now that I'm actually thinking about it, I think family photography is something I would do. I would maybe try to push more now. Now that I think about it, but just talking to you guys, I'm learning about
Yeah.
myself. Yeah. So, but it's interesting that you. I can see that though, because it's like if you're shooting a wedding, the people who actually hired you, you're the one that's kind of like watching you work all the time. And in this case, for the party for like a sweet 16, you're just hanging out with a 16-year-old, and then the parents are off, whatever. So it's not as much pressure.
Yes, and it's interesting. I've known my father. He the wedding I'm did in October, and I'm still editing.
Hmm.
They actually hired my dad as the videographer for the girl's Sweet 15.
Hmm.
So now she got married. But I never shot her 15. I was probably like 14 at that time.
Hmm.
But
Yeah, yeah.
she loves my father's videography style. So like that's kind of refreshing that like he has a client where we can kind of show the when she was young, and now she's like, okay, she hired
That's cool. Yeah,
him
yeah.
for the wedding. So yeah, it's more I see most of the clients that we are hired for is like pretty much the same, like family, same um small world basically.
Yeah, yeah. And in this case, though, if you think about it, like that's more of like your tail end client life cycle. Like if you were, for example, from that story you just told me, if you had to tell me where should I market, you should market to the 15, 16-year-old, parents, and then possibly get the wedding down the road. But it doesn't sound like that's something that, if that's weddings aren't what you're passionate about, that you don't have to spend as much time lead generating for weddings specifically.
Mhm. I don't mind weddings. I like them to a certain point, but it is like at the end of the day, it's like all the energy is out of you. So
Yeah.
that's all.
Yeah. For me, it's like when I come back now, it's like I come back at like 10. One of my kids can't sleep until I get home, so I come home and I help put him to sleep. It's like
Oh,
it's a draining thing. It's like, oh, it's you come back and you have to slip back into family mode very quickly. But I when I was just married and we didn't have kids, we just had a dog. It was very fun to shoot those. I could hang out after. I could, go get drinks with the other wedding photographer. Like that was a cool experience. But now it's, it shifts over time. I think that's another thing too, is depending on your season of life, just understand that it can
yes.
shift. And it doesn't mean you wasted your time. It just means that you just learn something about yourself as you move on. You know what I mean? But the experiences always apply to everything else. So I do want to say, especially to like Kenny and anybody who doesn't have kids or they're still just with their partner or whatever. Um, One thing I do think is useful about wedding photography though is it does train you. It's like wedding photography. It's like photography boot camp. You learn as many skills as possible. You learn how to shoot under the most rigorous pressure as possible. Um, and you have the most amount of photos to edit. You have like the most demanding clients, and then you end up really building a really I would say good process to do volume work to shoot in a random situation. So if I had a commercial shoot and all the studio lights didn't work, I would still be okay because I know how to think on the spot like that. I also know how to communicate with clients that are being a pain because that's how weddings are. Sometimes they're stressed out. So it does teach you a lot of stuff. So a lot of people avoid them for a good reason because they don't want to deal with that. But if you do have any type of interest, it's always good. I would say just experience like one just to see what it's like. And if you want to go down that path, it is a very easy skill set to apply to something else down the road. So if I work with a model, it's a little bit easier for me to do that because I've already worked with all these clients who don't even know how to pose. So then when I work with the first model I ever shot with, I was like, man, this is easy because she just does everything and I already can see the light. I know how to compose it. Um, and it's easy to transfer the skills a little bit. Or if you want to shoot products, I've already shot so many wedding shoes in my life that I know how to light products already and jewelry, and that transfers over to I can photograph a camera lens without having to rethink and learn something totally new. So that's one positive outcome about that. But it's just one of those things where, just especially you, Kenny, it seems like you're very busy with, work takes a lot of your time. Just really think about what is the most valuable or the most fulfilling use of that time. Um, because when you start going down the wedding photography thing, it is a little bit draining too. That's all I want to kind of give a transparent warning about.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Alex, you did turn on your camera, so I'm curious if you were able to come up with some insights on a niche to kind of explore.
Yeah, I did. I have two, but the main one I'm thinking about is urban fashion.
Mm-hmm.
So
Sweet. Well, what was the other one that you had that didn't win out?
probably basketball action shots. I really enjoy watching basketball, so
Mhm.
that's definitely up there.
What was would you mind sharing kind of like where how kind of like it broke down for you that kind of pushed the urban fashion kind of in the front running?
Um, it'd probably be more of like the what is it? Like the path for it, because I know
Mhm.
you can learn a lot. It's kind of like for basketball action. It's kind of
Yeah, there's always
you
certain.
learn as you're doing it because it's different situations, fast paced.
Yep.
So
Cool. Is that I mean, I think one thing too is, as far as the basketball thing goes, is if you had to, I guess this is another way to think about kind of like the niche exercise. Like 5 years down the road, if you were like you achieved all your goals, like which one would you see yourself doing? Because it's like you could easily be a NBA photographer, right? Like if you really were able to dedicate 100% of the time to try to do it, that's something a little bit easier to do than being in the NBA itself. Like being someone to photograph an NBA game within your local stadium, having to be able to do that on the side, or being sought after for bigger local brands, urban fashion brands. Like which one do you feel like you see yourself doing?
probably NBA. I think that'd be dope.
So I think
So
in that case is like, don't 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 like, I think what this helps to do is like if you have three interests, at least hopefully it lets you see two. You know what I mean? And if you are really fighting for your time between two, then at least you could figure out where to dedicate your time to at least one of them is. Um like in my current situation right now, just to share with you all, like I've done wedding photography for 7 years. I think I'm getting to a point where like, yeah, maybe I should just stop. Like it's not really, I'm more passionate about teaching people using kind of internet content mediums like Instagram and YouTube, or actually educating people um who I feel like were from the same background as me, is like not having a lot of time to dedicate to learning the craft, not having a network to be able to tap into, and creating some type of platform for those people to start exploring photography to a more serious level. That's my passion number one. So like, um but I think that's for me, like, just to be transparent, like with the financial part, even though you all have like your membership that you have to pay for, it is really almost like a break even type of business model, and that's where I have to like think about something else to kind of bring the revenue. I even like applied for a job last week and had an interview with them yesterday. I was like, I don't really like it though. So like I've even explored like being able to take on a job so I don't have to shoot weddings, I don't have to burn out on content, and I can just focus all my time on doing that job and then teaching you all like within this community. So there's just know that, there's one way I can look at it is like, oh man, I failed because this education isn't taking off. But there is ways where you can have one feed the other, and just know that there's that option, but it's just a matter of if you have limited time, you have limited time. So that hopefully doing these exercises, this is something you can even do like the first year trying to explore a niche, rethinking about it is saying like, is it really ranking up how I thought it was going to be versus something that I might be able to just pivot to. And also just playing around with ideas that, like, I think Gladys just put in like product photography. I don't know if that's something she was considering, but she still put it in there and evaluated it just to see like, hey, well, what does this would look like? Or Tasha put elopements, even though she said this is something she doesn't like, just to see what it kind of stacks up, right? I think that's just something fair to do just for yourself, because there's always a opportunity that you might not see. Like, for example, my business coach, my mentor, he is not a photographer. He's actually a he used to be a creative director for a motion design agency. So, you know, all those graphics that move in commercials and stuff. He did Xbox commercials, Harry Potter commercials, and all that stuff. And he used to work for an agency, and that agency pivoted to creating educational content for graphic designers. So he was in that job for a long time. And then he got poached by a creative agency that was trying to give him a whole lot of money. So he made this decision between these two jobs. Like, do I stick with this YouTube channel that has over 1 million subscribers and he's the content manager for it and he was making good money? Or do I do this graphic design firm that's going to pay me a lot of money to be a creative director? Or in that case, he actually had a YouTube channel also. And he did this type of exercise, and it came out that it wasn't the two jobs that he was deciding between. It was the one that he wasn't even considering at all, just going alone and being a YouTube channel and just going that way. He has more freedom. He has more flexibility. Now he has like over 300,000 subscribers. After he quit, he was able to scale it up. He works on his own time. He's making more money through sponsorships and ad revenue because that's just what he wanted to do. So sometimes the thing that you weren't considering can be the best option, especially if you consider the passion about it. Like, if you actually like doing it, if you could dedicate all the time that you're willing to dedicate to it, can you scale up the pay? Just thinking about all those things. Cool. Let's see. I realize Brax is on here too. Braxton, did you? I don't know if you're free to chat because I know you're still moving and busy and all that stuff. I'm curious if you did the exercise at all, or you've just been observing.
I've been observing for a lot of it, but the exercise, it seems like you're kind of just weighing out the niches that you're kind of thinking about doing.
Yep.
And so my two big niches that I sit there and go between on a daily basis, I'd say, is kind of like a photojournalist style wedding photography. I kind of like being off hands. I don't like being sitting there and having to pose people over and over again. I kind of like just catching the candidates and kind of being there. But then I also go back and forth between like an editorial, high fashion style photography. And, you know, when I weigh it out, I'd say wedding photography definitely is the better option. Because in at least in the market in my local area, for like the high fashion modeling editorial, it's really, really hard to make money in this area off of fashion photography. So, you know, I'm really passionate about doing it, but then when I have to weigh my options and how much time I'm using for editing 3-4 different sets of high fashion photos, it doesn't feel like I'm getting the reward that I get from weddings. And I get a lot of enjoyment from shooting weddings too. I find myself dancing on the dance floor with
nice
people and just having a great
That's
time.
not
you know,
me
like,
at all, but yeah, I'm glad you're that guy for sure.
Yeah. So
I
I
have
enjoy weddings a lot.
I have one question, and this is an idea that's popping up my head as you talk about this. So if you like high fashion editorial shoots, but why don't you like posing people at weddings?
See, because I like getting like those raw moments at weddings and like getting like the human interactions and stuff like that. And I guess I could try to use my skills of posing in the model and high fashion and kind of apply it to weddings, and it might get some good results that I like getting. So I'll have to try that out. I actually have a wedding tomorrow to shoot that I'm going to be doing. So wish me luck, guys.
Good luck. Good luck.
So thank
Yeah,
you.
because that's something that I would at least highly consider. Because for my best friend, he and I basically were doing this side hustle journey together. He was a research scientist who was doing wedding photography. I was a mechanical engineer trying to do wedding photography. He was kind of a weirdo and asked me to meet him up at a bar, even though I didn't know who he was, because we were both assisting for the same guy. So I went downstairs and told my wife, "Is like, hey, this guy wants to meet me down at the bar downstairs. I've never met him before, so if I don't come up in an hour, please try to check up on me to see." That's I basically, and now he's my best friend. Like I'm his kid's godfather. Like we're really close. But long story short is like he does his style is that he does editorial type portraits for his couples. So they hire him knowing that they want that photo. They'll do all the documentary stuff too. That's part of it, but they're dedicating making sure that they have a timeline set so that he can create that work because that's what they want. So if that's something you want to do, there are people who do documentary all the way up to the point where they do portraits and then they make these photos that look great. You're going to have to get a little bit better with just like actual off-camera flash versus like studio flashes because it's not a studio environment. But if you can be able to adjust your skill set to use flashes, in the field and be a little bit more makeshift. He has he always has an assistant because he has a lot of lights. And then go down that path. And then once the portraits are done, you just go back to doing documentary. There is a way to segment it that way. Because even how I photograph, I'm hands off most of the time, except when we do couple portraits, I got to make them feel comfortable. And that requires me to talk to them because my couples are very shy. And if I don't talk to them, they just kind of freeze up. So that's part of what I do. So I give a lot of direction. So I would say a lot of people have this dream of being purely photojournalistic, other than people like Kevin Mullins or like Fair, who do they basically used to be photojournalistic backgrounds before, or like military photographers before that have these type of raw type skill set. If you have a commercial background, it seems like a natural transition to try to incorporate some of that into it, because I think it just you have like two superpowers that you can merge together for this thing that you're saying you have a better passion for, and it would help you stand out, I think, a little bit more than just saying I like doing candids, because it's like you told me like I do photojournalistic weddings with like high fashion portrait sessions in the middle. Like that sounds different than something I hear typically. I hear a lot of people say they focus on story, candids, and raw moments. That's almost been a played out, very not played out, but like it's a very common thing to hear. So I'm just giving a little, projecting a little, I don't know, stirring out the pile a little bit,
A little
just to see
food
if you,
for thought.
yeah.
Yeah,
to
I
help,
love it.
'cause
I love that idea, man. I'm actually gonna sit down and really think about that, and I think I might move forward with that. Because combining both superpowers together and trying to come up with something how did you stand out from everyone else that's in the market? Because when you sit there and you join like Facebook groups, you see like how many wedding photographers there are, and it's really important to try to stand out. So
definitely. And it's another thing too, is you can also, one other thing that, for example, I don't know how to do because I've never done it before, is like styled shoots. I've never organized one before, but if you were already doing commercial shoots with like a high fashion kind of skewed toward high fashion, you already have a skill set behind producing shoots like that. There's no reason to say you can't do spec work to create a high fashion wedding portfolio that jives consistently with documentary work. Like if you put a lot of care into making sure the editing and the processing and the lighting of your raw documentary photos also looks cohesive to your kind of high fashion look to wedding portraits, it could be like slam dunk. So I'm just it's just something that I see from the outside. Like it seemed like it was a very easy thing to mix together. Cool.
Awesome. Yeah, I love that idea. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Yeah, for sure. Does anybody else have any random questions or thoughts that are still left over before we close down the call? Cool. So I think one thing that I would like to just tell everyone here on the call, as well as whoever is watching the recording, is this type of exercise is probably one of the most important ones that you can do. So, because it sets the stage for everything else. If you're building a website, you still need to build it around a certain type of brand. If you need to write about yourself and your about me, you still have to figure out where that brand is going to, who they're going to be talking to, who you want to attract, who you want to hire you. Even if you're just looking for the type of editing skill set that you want to go down, all of these things kind of still interplay with this initial kind of idea of like, where do I want to focus my time, energy, and education, your effort, what I feel comfortable failing at so that I can learn how to be better at this. It all starts from here. And I think one of the things that I will just tell you as the last kind of like anecdote is like, once I told myself, no, my personal mission is to educate, it makes a lot of things just fall into the background as far as like, yeah, this guy who's trying to tell me he's got 5 luxury real estate photographers pining for his wedding. I don't care, because I'm like, my goal here is to educate. So I'm actually using you to educate my community because this is funny. You know what I mean? Like it puts things into perspective. So I just want you to remember, it is your superpower to be able to have this focus of thought. It helps you to, your kids are sick and you have a wedding that you set up to like assist on, and it's just kind of what you're interested in, but your priority is more about taking care of your kids, then you know how to make that decision. You know what I mean? It's one of those things where, again, we're not locked into these things unless you have already set a client gig or whatever. All these things are either to build your portfolio, to build your skill set, or to build your network. Being calculated about these things and at least having a more like learning perspective about it, I think is really helpful. Especially again, because we're not relying on this yet. The goal is always to build it into something that we can rely on, but if you're not relying on it yet, just keep that in mind, that is actually a benefit and a freedom that you have, and that photographers who do this full time are stuck a little bit. You know what I mean? If they built a 6-figure wedding photography business and their family relies on that financial situation, they can't just pivot super easily unless they made it that way. So that's where that's a little bit harder to pivot out of and to start learning some other skill set versus how we are today is we have something else that's going to kind of keep us afloat so that we can take our time to learn what we need to learn.
So what was the latest on this Mr. 5 photographers guy?
He ghosted me. It's funny because his partner inquired first, and then he inquired too with a different contact form. So that already told me that they're not really talking to each other. They inquired with 2 different budgets, but for some reason my Honeybook connected them both together because they were copying each other on it. And it came to the point where he said, we can book a call whenever. And I was like, as long as we can land on a range, that's fine. He told me his range. I gave him 3 options. He didn't say anything. I gave him 3 options that fit within the range that he told me, but it required reducing the number of hours. I don't negotiate down. I cut scope. That's how I do it. So if you tell me your budget is $4,000, fine, you're getting shot for 6 hours instead of 8. And if you want an engagement session, then you'll shoot for 5 and add an engagement session. I'm very systematic because I don't like to play this like, I even feel unethical if I have to give random discounts between price things. So mine is a very easy thing to calculate, and I'm not gonna follow up because I don't want to. If it was somebody that I wanted to follow up with, I would. But yeah, I was just waiting to see if he's gonna email me back again. I could also just try to. For a teaching aspect, I have a strategy to get somebody to reply to me. So maybe I'll just try to do that and see if he replies. Because there's this other book that I read that I would recommend to you if anyone starts going into sales called Never Split the Difference. It's a FBI hostage negotiator who teaches you negotiation tactics that can be used in business and in family life and everything else. There's a very specific email that says like, have you given up on finding something? So have you guys given up on finding a wedding photographer? Or something like that. And then it will kind of spur people who are like him who say, no, I didn't give up, like blah blah. Then he'll respond. Like so I'll see if he responds to that. But other than that, I wasn't really trying to get a resolve yet, at least. It was very funny though. His actual responses after the fact were pretty funny too. So I'm like, he definitely seems like a person who works in luxury because he talks a lot bigger than what's actually necessary for a wedding photography conversation. But yeah, so I don't want to. We're at 6:30 now. If anyone has any other questions, let me know. Other than that, I think we will sign off for now, and I will see you all in the Slack. All right, see you, everyone.
Bye, guys. Have a
See
good
ya.
night.
Thanks, Raj.
All right, see you.